All right, so I'm going to talk to you now about how we're going to be doing a rabbet on a piece. So a rabbet on a piece means that we're cutting out something like, if I was going to put a rabbet cut on this board here, you'd be cutting out like a section like that by that. So we'd be removing that little corner there. And the projects that we're doing in here all require rabbets to some degree. Okay? So the difference between a dado and a rabbet is a dado goes across the grain and is in from the edge. A rabbet goes at the corner of a board and is a little bit cut out there. So you do rabbets on table saw, you can do rabbets with a dado blade or a single cut blade, cutting it twice. We're going to be using the bearing that holds onto the piece here. So this is in this direction for the bearing out, and different size bearings are going to yield different depth cuts. For the bearing out, we're cutting 1/4 of an inch. Okay? This is a 1/2 inch shank on this, and the 1/2 inch shank we need is now in the router table from the video that we did before. I'm going to remove that. Actually, I'm going to take the whole motor of this router out, so I can have better access to it. Hold the bottom, and then remember we're loosening the top off. We're trying to do it so that we're not smashing our fingers. So they're offset just to a degree. I squeeze with my hand, and that will loosen that top one off. And here's the 1/2 inch collet that the bit fits into. So I'm putting it in this one. And I'm going to put it onto, not my table mounted router, but I'm going to put it onto my handheld router. So that's going to go in here, and it's going to get threaded in. Now I'll take those same wrenches, and I'll tighten this one up. Okay? That's good. Now, the depth from the bearing to the end of the router is defined by the size of the bearing and the bit that you're using. So that's 1/4 inch. That is not changing. Now we want to cut a 1/4 by 1/4 rabbet. So I want my other direction to be 1/4 of an inch also. These were made by me by the engineering department, or the engineering class, and they're more accurate here than they are here. They're a little bit greater than 1/4 of an inch there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen up my plate here. Sometimes when we tighten this and loosen it, we do it with the wrench here so we get a little bit more of a snug fit. This design is no longer used by Porter Cable. Nowadays they have a clamp that clamps the motor in, which is better. Okay? So I'm going to set this thing up so that it comes down and touches the top of that. Top of that. So right now, if you look at that, this is laying flat, and my bit is actually touching the, goes over top of that like that. A little bit of friction there. So that means that this cut is going to be 1/4 by 1/4. To lock it, I want to again use this wrench and just give it one last little twist there to make sure that it is snug. And this is the router I'm using. The only reason I got the router table out was to grab the collet off of that router. Okay? So now if I want to do this to the edge of a board, let me find a board to do it to. I'm going to grab a board from the scrap. So I want to cut a 1/4 by 1/4 rabbet out of this. 1/4 by 1/4. It's in the vise. I'm going to mark the one side for us. Mark it at 1/4 by 1/4. So that's going to be like this. I'll put my marker here. So that's 1/4 by 1/4. This section right here has to go away. Okay? So I want to set it so that my bearing, which is going to ride along this section right here, has room to bypass it. So I'm going to put this put it on a table edge right here and clamp it there. The one thing is that these table edges are rounded, and I'd rather have that be on a sharp 90 edge. So I'm going to get one of the boards that we've been using here to do our router. We've got our stop potatoes, the one that are over in the corner. So I'm going to grab this board. The first thing we do when we get a board like this is we want to clamp this to the table so it doesn't move around on us. So I'm going to grab 2 orange spring clamps, and I'm going to clamp it 2 locations. That just makes the thing's not going to move on us. Okay? Now I'm going to be cutting this off here. So I'll draw my other end so you can see from where you're standing what that's going to look like. So 4 inches right there. So I'm going to go here, right here. And I want to clamp this down tight. Okay? So on your projects, you're going to do stopped rabbits, which are a little bit more difficult than just a rabbit that run all on the edge. So what I want to do here is I'm going to have my rabbit come here, and I'm going to have it go to here. Okay? So my depth is a 1/4 inch. I don't know that I'm going to be exactly a 1/4 inch with this line I'm drawing here. There, and I want to cut out a 1/4 here as well. So I'm cutting out that little section right there. The most trying part of this whole thing, the most difficult part, the part that requires the most practice is balancing the router. Okay? The boards that we're going to be routing are wider than this. So I'm going to bring in a base to the router that is kind of a teardrop shape, and the handle's over here for to give you a little bit more leverage to help hold this thing. So when I do this though, I'm going to have it be that before I even do this, I want to go ahead and hold onto it and hold it with my hand, with one hand, just to get a feel for what it feels like to balance this so it stays flat. Okay? Remember, the on-off switch on these routers is just a toggle switch. And it is possible that the person who had it last unplugged it before they turned it off. Which means that as soon as you plug this thing in, it would start running on us. That would be a bad thing, right? So whenever you plug in a router, you have the bit facing away that's not going to be cutting anything as soon as it turns on. And you have your hand on it so that it's not going to run away from it either. Remember, the router goes about 23,000 RPM at its fastest, and that is super fast. Okay, this is a fixed router, meaning that I have the depth locked and everything. I can't plunge into the piece here. So it's a fixed router, and it also does not have the soft start that that larger plunge router that we have has. That one starts at lower RPM and kind of moves up. This one, as soon as I turn it on, I'm already at 23,000 RPM. Okay? So one of the handles faces inside. We would never make this cut like this because it's way too difficult when we have our handles in line with the board to balance it. The handle has to be over the side. And I want to come in at that spot. So my cut's going to be like this. I'm balancing it with one hand. going to hit anything. And you can see the cut that I made. Now, it also made kind of a nasty tearing noise, correct? That nasty tearing noise is the fact that we're using oak. And oak is very grainy and it would be like that. If I want to cut down on the amount of noise that happens to, I can make a half cut to begin with. So let me show you what that would look like. So this time, I'm going to go from here to here, 1/4 inch in, 1/4 inch down. And my first cut, I'm not going to pull the router all the way to the bearing. So my first cut's going to be more like that depth. And I'll show you what I mean. Set it on there so that the blade's not touching the wood. Turn it on. So that's how I made a cut, but it doesn't go all the way to my line. Next, I'm going to go back and I'm going to make a pass. This time I'm going to bring it all the way to the bearing. By the way, the horrible noise this router makes has to do with the brushes that are on in the motor. So that's the cut, and it's got a little bit less fray, and it sounded a little bit better than the last cut that we made. Now what still has to be done is that we're going to take these corners out with a saw and a chisel, and that'll be done. So we're marking where our stop and starts are. We're able to see that when we bring our head down in alignment with this. We're always wearing glasses, and very honestly, if I'm working at home with the router for an extended period of time, I'm absolutely wearing hearing protection. Okay? So this is set up. It may not be set up when you come back into class. We always unplug it. Whenever you're changing a bit, it's unplugged, right? And I'll look at your setup before you actually start cutting to make sure that it's secured in there and that everything looks right.